Hello and welcome, everyone. We are thrilled to have you with us today for the third installment of our webinar series for AI builders. Whether you've been following along since parts 1 and 2, or if you're brand new to the series, we're excited to host today's discussion around the third stage of our AI journey, the adoption phase. My name is Jackie Watts, and I'm the Learning and Insights Lead at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, a 21st century philanthropy dedicated to advancing AI and data science solutions to shape a more sustainable, equitable, and thriving future for all. In case you are brand new to these webinars, I'll share just a little bit of context. Today's event is part of a 4-part series where we're taking a look at each phase of what we call the AI journey through the lens of several of our grant partners. The first part of the series was focused on the curiosity phase, where organizations are building familiarity with what AI is and how you can prepare your team for responsible AI integration. The second part went into the exploration phase, where we dug into topics like starting with a problem-first approach, navigating the build versus buy decision, and how to ready your organization's data. These first 2 parts of the series are available on PJMF's Learning Hub on the Curiosity and Exploration pages, respectively. Today, we will continue along the journey by discussing the adoption phase. For AI builders, this often means selecting, training, and evaluating an AI model, building trust with your users through the product development lifecycle, strengthening AI governance practices, and more. For those looking ahead, we'll be hosting the final phase of the journey, the impact phase, in the new year, where we'll look at how to evolve and/or scale an AI-powered solution, assess impact, and give back to the sector by strengthening the overall ecosystem. If you haven't checked it out already, we invite you to visit PJMF's Learning Hub for curated resources, case studies, and guidance along any phase of that journey. Now back to today's panel, we're excited to be joined by 3 of our grant partner organizations who have successfully navigated the adoption phase and generously offered to share their time and learnings with us today. We'll hear a short presentation from each of our guests, followed by a panel discussion. And finally, we'll have some time for audience Q&A at the end, so we invite you to put any of the questions that you have for our speakers into the chat. Lastly, if you'd like to share the event with others in your network who couldn't make it today, we will be posting the recording on the Learning Hub adoption page after the event. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Yolanda to introduce our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Jackie. As Jackie mentioned, my name is Yolanda Batti-Ludovico, and I'm the Storytelling and Advocacy Lead here at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And I'm really thrilled to introduce our 3 expert speakers for today. We'll begin with 3 short presentations from each of them, and then we'll move on to the panel discussion, which will be moderated by Jackie. So first, we have Dr. Alysia Garmulewicz, who's the co-CEO and founder of Materiom, a platform providing open data and AI to accelerate the development of bio-based materials. Alysia specializes in data-driven approaches for bio-based materials R&D. She's also an associate professor of the circular economy at the Adolfo Ibáñez University in Chile and an associate fellow at the CABDYN Complexity Center at the University of Oxford. Alysia is a Rhodes Scholar and has a doctorate from the Said Business School at the University of Oxford. We also have with us today Jeremy Wight, who is a seasoned technology executive with more than 15 years of experience leading product and engineering teams across early and mid-stage technology companies. He is passionate about building scalable products that serve millions of users and about cultivating high-performing, mission-driven teams. He serves as the Chief Technology Officer at CareMessage, where he oversees the organization's technical strategy, platform architecture, and long-term product direction, with a focus on driving measurable impact for safety net patients and their care teams. Before joining CareMessage, Jeremy co-founded Base, where he led product and engineering and helped shape the company's product vision, culture, and growth. And last but not least, we have Rafael Pólit, who is the tech lead for the Uwazi platform at Huridocs, where he co-developed software tools that help human rights defenders turn documents into structured, searchable data. With a background in web development and software engineering, Rafa has helped build and evolve Uwazi since joining Huridocs in 2016, from its early prototypes to a complex production-grade platform that's now used worldwide. He focuses on back-end architecture, product development, and making technology accessible for non-technical users. His work is driven by commitment to social impact and the belief that technology should empower those working for justice and accountability. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'll pass it off to Alysia for the first presentation on her work at Materiom.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate that introduction, and it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much to the McGovern Foundation for having us, and I'm really excited for the conversation today. So at Materiom, we're all about growing the regenerative materials economy, and that means materials that are actually healthy for the planet and healthy for humans. Next slide, please. So I think we're all quite familiar more and more with the crisis that we're in when it comes to pollution. Specifically, plastics pollution is set to triple by 2060. Not only is that a crisis for our world's ecosystems, like our oceans, but it's actually increasingly a human health challenge. So plastics like these bags break down and are in our drinking water, our food, our bloodstreams. We have about a plastic spoon's worth of plastic in our brains now on average, and that's set to triple, as I said. So this is something that is a mammoth challenge, and we're aiming to address it at source. Next, please. So our mission at Materiom is to eliminate plastics at source by radically accelerating the market entry of bio-based compostable materials. So these materials can have the same properties as petroleum plastics, but crucially, they can go back into soil at end of life, and they can be made from renewable resources. Next, please. Now, the good news is that there is a burgeoning number of innovators who are trying to develop these amazing alternatives that can hold weight, repel moisture, and then be composted to feed the soil. However, next, please. What we see is that on average, it takes about 20 years and 100 million to get a new material to market. And this is just standard. This is not just for bio. This is for a new material in general. And the time sinks for innovators, what's happening and why it's taking so long. First of all, it's a huge amount of sifting through information to try and find a new recipe, a new formulation that will be the right one, and then a lot of trial and error experiments to actually get it to a commercializable material, meaning that it has to be high performance, and it also has to work with manufacturing lines, usually existing manufacturing lines that brands want a new material to also work with. And those constraints mean that it's a very, very difficult engineering challenge. And I often like to say that unlike petrochemical materials that have 100 years of R&D and a huge amount of just standard knowledge for how to make a new material with the same building blocks, natural materials have a whole new set of challenges. There isn't the amount of information and data available, and they're a lot more variable in terms of sources. So there's a lot of new data challenges there that these entrepreneurs are up against, not to even mention the kind of competitive challenges of trying to take on the petrochemicals industry. Next, please. So what we are trying to do at Materiom is try and get these entrepreneurs and speed their route to market, specifically by making R&D and accelerating it. So making it easier, making it faster. And what we're trying to do is really target the early discovery process and identify not only the first formulations they should try, but how to actually optimize them and get them into manufacturing lines faster. So let's take an example. Next, please. Imagine we are developing a coating for takeout boxes. Now, you'd think that this is cardboard, which it is, but it's coated with polypropylene usually to have a barrier for your food, your soup, your coffee, whatever. Imagine a company trying to make a natural alternative that actually doesn't go into microplastics in your bloodstream, but actually is safe and healthy. they would have to go through years of trial and error trying to find that formulation. And instead, what we're offering at Materiom, what we're on the road to doing, next please, is identifying a performance challenge and then providing the actual formulation through first sifting through the scientific literature, identifying starting points, and then we're actually aiming to add to that picture a lot of new formulation data that helps them identify the processing steps to get that formulation to market. So the goal is a really a smart, intelligent platform that can identify the right formulation. Instead of doing trial and error in an experimental workshop, you can actually do that computationally. Next, please. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit on our AI journey. We launched in 2018 with a Materiom Commons, which is basically an open database of bio-based recipes. And our AI journey layered into that ecosystem started in 2023 with our first version. And that we got that out of the gate really, really fast in order to do user discovery. So that's a really important point, is that we knew it wasn't the be-all end-all of an AI agent in this space. It used RAG. It was, better than the kind of regular consumer-facing frontier models, but it had a lot of issues with it. But we knew that it would be really helpful as a user discovery tool to understand what users really wanted out of this R&D experience. So we got that out the door. We now have Materiom AI version 2 out for customer discovery purposes and feedback. And the key leap, and we learned this from getting the early version out, was ensuring that we had a structured database behind it. So instead of just using RAG that was connected to the open access scientific literature, which was version 1, we now mined that scientific literature and created a structured database. And I can go into the reasons why, but basically it just creates a much better data experience for the user. And it allows to create more summary reports, more like overall insights of data, quantitative data especially, that our users are specifically wanting. And then the next step in our, it's also multi-agent now, which is exciting because it also makes use of a lot of that current agentic workflows. And then 2026, what we're aiming to do is really double down on this data pipeline. As I mentioned, there's not enough quality data in our space, and it's very fragmented and hard to compare. So what we're doing is not only integrating other sources of data, like patents, for instance, but we're also generating high quality data with robotic workflows with partner labs. And that's a use of AI. So AI is used not only in our data mining strategy, our workflow with large language models, but also with running these robotics labs and finding the right data in a very smart, intelligent workflow that can train our models. And so we've been developing these partnerships this year, and now we're ready to press go on our first data sets. We actually have the pilot data sets all ready to play with. So that's really exciting to hopefully make a kind of massive leap in quality when it comes to the type of R&D support that you can get in our space. Okay, last one. Next. And just to reiterate, our impact goal is really to help these innovators cross the lab to factory gap where most are falling down. It's a big chasm in R&D right now to try and get these materials not only in a great promising formulation in the lab environment, but actually have the ability to scale in manufacturing lines. And that's where this process data that we're investing with these robotic laboratories will really help. Last. Yeah, so just a thank you to our supporters, our team, and I really welcome this conversation, and I would love to dig into any of our technology stack and the kind of use and application of AI that we've been working with. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alysia. It's so exciting to hear about how you're overcoming all of these data governance challenges and just data challenges in general. I'm sure the audience will be excited to learn more about how you're doing that in practice. And then just exciting to see how AI can make these sustainable business practices more accessible. We'll move over to Jeremy for the next presentation on his work at CareMessage.
Hello all, my name is Jeremy Wight. I'm the Chief Technology at CareMessage. CareMessage has the largest patient engagement platform in the US, and our mission is to improve health equity for low-income individuals, and we do that through technology. And specifically, we are trying to drive health outcomes in the areas of increased access to care, clinical outcomes, and addressing social drivers of health. Next slide. We were launched in 2013 and have pretty significant scale. So we serve safety net healthcare providers across the US. We've exchanged almost 500 million messages between low-income patients and providers, safety net providers, reaching 20 million patients over the past 10 plus years. So again, a pretty significant amount of scale and data, and this is kind of what brings us to some of our challenges. So next slide. Before I dig into what we've kind of built thus far, I thought just a really brief, like the differences between prompt engineering and retrieval augmented generation. So if like prompt engineering is telling the model, the LLM, how to think, RAG is giving it different information at runtime, or stated differently, if you're teaching someone, it's like teaching someone how to think versus giving them the textbook and saying, give me answers out of the textbook as they're producing those answers. So we've used both of these at CareMessage, and I'll kind of talk about those in the next slide. So next. So with that amount of data and messages, a lot of our data exists in SMS messages that happen between providers and low-income patients. So the first is we expect a structured response. So how might we accurately and consistently map unstructured responses to a B, yes, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 when our rules-based engine does not match appropriately? And then the second is, how of these millions of messages might we categorize them so we can understand what that topic is about so that we can improve the intervention in driving outcomes? Next slide. So why does this matter? Approximately 8% of all messages prior to this would fail to properly match a expected response, which is 500,000 messages. It's pretty significant. And we believe that AI could fix some of that. And then second is, with this 80 million plus messages per year, how do we know what they're about so that we can improve them and tie them to outcomes? Next slide. So this is a few examples of actual patient responses where we're expecting a structured response where we did not get our structured response. So they're like a response that our rules-based engine could not interpret back to an expected response, so it would return an error, one impacting the patient because they don't get understanding, and then impacting the provider because they would have to manually review those. Next slide. So some of the things that we think about as we apply AI is like, how do we evaluate performance and reliability over time? How do we guarantee the level of quality that we expect? And how do we monitor that for bias and safety as we implement this, in particular with the vulnerable populations? Next slide. So this is some examples of how we started. So this was like, we started right after OpenAI became big. And so we tested some of the different models, OpenAI's models, as well as Google. At the time, it was Palm 2. This is prior to Gemini. And we were testing for both precision and recall, different parts to accuracy. And so ultimately, we found that Palm 2 for our use case was the most accurate, and also offered a BAA, which is required in healthcare settings. So we went with Palm 2. Next slide. So that was part of our validation. The second thing we did was user research. So we actually talked to a lot of customers. This was, again, early on when AI was becoming popular, but we found that generally the sentiment was positive, and as long as there were certain controls in place, customers were confident in us being able to use it with this data. Next slide. So then how did we validate this? So we started off with human categorized structured responses, and then we moved to kind of a larger set of staging responses, and then we moved to production responses in the back end that didn't take action and then finally took action. But we built this UI so that we could actually have a human, multiple humans in the loop, validating, testing, and helping us get better as we iterated on the different prompts. Next slide. As we produced this customer facing, we made sure that anytime AI took action, that it was visible, that there was like emails if you wanted them, that you could opt in and out, things like this to, again, maintain clarity and safety for the user's understanding of what was taking place. Next slide. Through the test results, we've done way more than this since then, but we ultimately went through 4 different prompts, tested them against these different models, and ultimately our threshold for accuracy for this was 80%. We've achieved 85% at this time. It's even higher than that now, but again, meeting our needs as an organization. Next slide. So the second problem was, how do we take all of these messages and actually classify them topically? And what we found is we tried doing the same thing that we'd done. It did not work as effectively, so we were not getting a high enough threshold. So we built a RAG pipeline and started creating representative examples that were compared during the actual classification process. And so with that, we were able to reach an over 90% accuracy in this categorization process, which met our expectations and was significantly better. So helped us as an organization mature in our AI utilization, but also created better outcomes. Next slide. So these are a few examples of the 60 plus categories and how we were seeing precision and recall before we then moved into applying RAG. And then the next slide that you can go to, you'll see this is kind of what we found. So approximately 20% of all of our messages were about colorectal cancer. That's great. That allows us to know, hey, we need to make sure that given the volume of that our content that we provide there is really impactful, and it allows us to drill into, now that we understand that, what messages are really driving outcomes for patients of that type, so that we can iterate and get better in the interventions for behavior change. Next slide. So the results, ultimately, in the first case, we were able to reduce by over 50% all errors, which is a significant amount of responses. And then the second, we now are able to get categories and understand the 80 million plus messages that are flowing through our system every year, which again is just the beginning for where we're headed in our data intelligence pipeline. Next slide. And that's it. I look forward to talking more about this during our conversation with the other panelists.
Thank you, Jeremy. And what I love about that work is it's not about AI replacing caregivers or medical professionals, but it's really about amplifying their capacity to serve a greater number of patients, and really having the human in the loop throughout every part of that process is critical. We'll move over to Rafa now for a presentation on his work at Huridocs.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you to the McGovern Foundation for this invite. We're really excited to be here. I'm Rafael Pólit. I'm the tech lead for the WASI platform at Huridocs. So yeah, let's talk about AI adoption and how we do it and the practical trade-offs we have to come to. Yeah. So for the last 40 years, Huridocs has been providing tools for human rights defenders to advocate justice and accountability. Our platforms help partners turn more than 500,000 documents into structured, searchable data. We use AI to extract metadata from these documents and text fields, automatically translate those fields into multiple languages, generate table of contents from PDFs and other applications, providing collections which support multiple languages, not only at the level of the result of the presentation, but at the level of the analysis of the data and data extraction, are central to what we do. Next slide, please. So one of the key challenges we face with AI adoption is data governance and keeping the data safe. Because of that, we try to as the graphic shows, avoid the big name corporate APIs, and we prefer using self-hosted servers with compact, small machine learning models or AI models. And this allows us to train models in-house and avoid data sharing outside our sandbox environment. Next slide, please. Another challenge is the predictability of the results and the user experience around consuming these models. Machine learning models are often unpredictable and not always deterministic. That is, they don't always produce the same results. And in our case, in most cases, there isn't a single model that fits or solves all scenarios. In this case, size does matter. Larger models are more accurate and predictable, but even then, managing user expectations can be tricky, difficult, because many expect AI to fully automate their tasks or be 100% accurate. This is not really the case. And one of our approaches to help mitigate these problems is what we call active learning. We use user-curated data to train the models. We developed UIs for results validation and then retrain these models to help reduce unpredictability. We also clearly label all AI-generated data so that users know when content has not been produced by a human being. The next slide, please. How do we avoid relying on big company APIs at this point? As mentioned, we use smaller models, and the trick is that we pick these smaller models dynamically. Instead of selecting one model up front, we test scenarios across multiple models. Some are machine learning, some are traditional algorithms, and we pick the best one for each individual case. We have begun implementing also what is called mixture of experts, which allows part of the model to specialize, and we only run the relevant subset rather than the whole model. All this is transparent to the end users, but through validation, we retrain the models and improve the results dynamically. I have also mentioned that we avoid the large corporation APIs, but the truth is that we can also feature flag the use of these external APIs, so users who need them for some workflows can enable them based on their own data governance needs. Finally, some problems are solved better and more cheaply without machine learning. Traditional methods are faster and they are predictable, and dynamic model selection lets us choose the right tool for the job. We also pick all these models so that they can run on consumer-grade hardware. Next slide, please. So what do we expect looking forward? We see the industry moving toward a one model to rule them all strategy, requiring massive, expensive infrastructure with users tied to proprietary platforms. And companies are publishing less and less their findings and keeping advances private due to economic competitive pressures. Where do we see ourselves going? We believe in building or adapting smaller open source models and making them accessible and easy to integrate. We focus on models that solve specific problems rather than trying to solve everything with a single system. And finally, as consumer hardware improves, its ability to run better models will also increase. Thank you very much for your time. The goal here is to start a conversation. Thank you to all the panelists. Let's find solutions together. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that call to action. Thank you, Rafa. Those were 3 wonderful presentations. I think each of you have given us some excellent threads to pull on for the panel discussion. So I'll pass it over to my colleague Jackie now, who will be leading that discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Yolanda. And thank you, Alysia, Rafa, and Jeremy for sharing more about your work, and excited to dive into many things that you all brought up today. To start, I wanted to open up our first question for all 3 of you. As we know, one of the only ways to get to a truly impactful AI solution is by getting quality user feedback along the way. And so I'd love to dive into each of your product development life cycles a little bit, and specifically, how have you incorporated user input during the development of your AI solutions? How has that shaped your overall solution, and maybe if there's any specific aspects of the user experience that you discovered were more or less important than you initially assumed based on that research.
I can take a stab at that first.
Great, thanks, Alysia.
Yeah, we are really user directed in the way that we develop our product. First of all, we are constantly running open-ended discovery calls on a weekly basis with users and non-users to capture not only the user's objective and their challenges as the market shifts, and that's ongoing, but also we are developing our AI solution with like a host of in-app feedback and survey features. So basically, we're trying to capture immediate feedback from users with like response level feedback, thumbs up, thumbs down kind of stuff. Was it helpful? Accuracy, as well as session level feedback with onboarding surveys and exit surveys. So that's like an integrated part of our development. And then we also host kind of post-usage feedback calls on a weekly basis. So not only the kind of discovery stuff, but also with those who are using the tool, kind of actually requesting 30-minute feedback calls in apps. So basically you can access a kind of Calendly link in an automated way through our system. And that's really great for capturing more nuanced product feedback. And then lastly, we also have cross-community upvoting surveys. So we're consistently in our software environment, allowing users to suggest things that they'd like, new features, and those that receive the kind of most upvotes, we action. So that's the kind of like gamut of user tools we have on an ongoing basis to capture that. And I would just say, yeah, one of the most maybe it's obvious, but we've really needed a lot of user education for how to construct a good question, i.e. prompt. That's something that is non-obvious, especially to folks who are using it as an R&D tool. It's something where the better the prompt, the better the question, the better response, and calibrating how we interpret like whether users like it, and as well like trying to encourage best practices when it comes to how to prompt and question the model is something that we're consistently needing to work on.
Awesome, thanks, Alysia. Maybe Jeremy, I'll pass it over to you next.
Yeah. So obviously our product is a little different than what was described, right? So we're not building something that is like an LLM that is, completely AI, right? We're adding it to our product in different ways and going, what are the ways in which we can drive the most impact for our users, which are, providers at community health or community health workers, and the patients that they support, right? And so for us, a few things, we're looking at like, what is the volume of, what do we believe the impact of solving a given challenge will be for our patient populations? Sometimes it's more important to solve the problem for the user. Sometimes it's more important to solve the problem for the patient. But in terms of how we gather feedback, so I think a lot of things that were shared previously in terms of general solicitation of feedback, really important to have those practices in your product development process. But for us, in addition to that specifically, because we are kind of like, let's say maybe like a B2B2C kind of product where our product is purchased and leveraged by the healthcare providers themselves, safety net clinics, and then they in turn are using it to work with their patient populations. It's actually harder in a lot of cases to get direct patient feedback. But we do that through different user research tools to kind of create and curate looking for targeted patient populations, either that don't work with our safety net providers, or we meet them through that. And so we've done multiple sessions where we're doing qualitative feedback sessions to understand the impact of different things that we're doing. And then in terms of the solutions that I specifically described that we've built, The first was like, what's the volume and the impact of not solving this, right? Like those 500,000 messages that I represented, if it takes 2 to 3 minutes a piece, and that would be on the low end, just to do something with that information, that's a significant impact. And it's even more impactful when, if we misunderstand a response, for example, it's an appointment reminder, and we think that someone is still going to an appointment and then they don't. That means that that healthcare provider, their time was not used effectively, and there might have been a walk-in patient that they could have supported, and so by being able to do that, the impact both to the patient and the provider is significant. So we're looking at multiple different factors when we're deciding, hey, what should go into the roadmap? How do we develop these solutions more effectively, including taking the user's understanding of like how effective was the recategorization, because it's not perfect, right? There's a small percentage of things that don't go according to plan, but that's just some of the things that we do as we think about how we're evaluating what to make adjustments to or what to change in our roadmap.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Rafa, anything you'd like to add about?
Yeah, I think our situation is a little bit different because we host about 500 now collections, which are widely different in nature from each other, right? So we are not doing a single niche product. We're actually trying to cater for a lot of people. And we have been around for a while now, and as we implement machine learning, some of the scenarios we're trying to solve have already been a problem there. So we are kind of getting feedback from the non-machine learning part of the process, but we also try to work heavily with feature flagging our processes, right? What we do is we develop everything now as a feature flag, and we just target very specific partners. And we have a very hefty programs team within our organization that are actually very focused on talking one-on-one with the partners, even doing on-site workshops and whatnot, so that we can fine-tune their necessities. And the tricky part here is that after we fine-tune them for a specific partner and their needs, obviously we need to implement something that works for everyone in different levels, right? We can never cater to everyone's needs, but the idea is to actually have something useful for everyone. So yeah, the testing process is an interesting part. We do have, as mentioned, since we had the problem before, we do have some automated metrics, but we heavily rely on the user's feedback and the usability. I talked a little bit about the lingo difficulties that are within conveying these AI things, right? Like how to get the perfect prompt, or what does it mean to retrain a model or to label data, right? So the feedback goes not only to the actual application of the algorithm, but to how you convey to the partners, to the users, what is it doing, what is it that they are interacting with, how they are interacting, what is their level of input into this, and how it affects the outcome, right? So yeah, it's a tough topic, and we're trying to incorporate more automated feedback, but it's also time consuming, right? So
yeah, sounds like a huge challenge is how to guide the user through those effective prompts, helping them understand the limitations, helping them understand how they're interacting with AI in the interface. So for our next question, I'm going to direct this one to you, Jeremy. I know CareMessage has experimented with a few different use cases that you described during your presentation. And I'm glad you set the stage with a little bit about prompt engineering versus retrieval augmented generation. And I know that you found that there were varying levels of effectiveness of each of those approaches with your different use cases. Would you mind going a little deeper into how your team kind of refined and found the best technique for each use case, kind of what metrics were guiding that? What did your evaluation process look like for kind of arriving at the right solution for each use case?
Yeah, so at least at first, I would love to say that it was like just this thoughtful deduction, and it was more like, let's figure out what works, right? And how effective. So, kind of how we started off was just, hey, do we think this will be effective, right? Like, will leveraging an LLM to reclassify these unstructured messages into the categories that we expect them, will it even be effective at doing so? So it started off kind of from that hypothesis, and let's start testing. And so, through that, we didn't have at the time specialized AI or ML engineers. I'd done some work in the past on kind of sentiment analysis work with some other folks, but we hadn't gone deep into LLMs. But it was like, let's just test this. And so, but we, learned just like any engineer can, right? And figured out, hey, we can kind of break down how effective these different models are at the challenge, at the problem. And so we started that way, right? By creating a labeled data set, as Rafa mentioned, and then evaluating it against that with different models to find how do the different models actually impact this. Because again, Rafa mentioned this and showed it in his deck that there are different models that are going to perform more effectively or less effectively at different tasks, and depending on how specialized or how generalized that is, could have a meaningful impact. So that's where we started. And again, we just set a threshold of like, if it's greater than 80%, the cost benefit, the impact is going to be worthwhile for the maybe handful of inaccuracies that might take place. And so that was our starting point. And for that task, it worked. And so, again, as I mentioned, we kind of went through multiple steps of how we arrived at that validation, and did a lot of human in the loop review. But then as we expanded to this categorization, which was different because we're talking, in this case, there was less structure to what we were looking for, where in the first case, we knew that this question was a defined set, right? It's either a yes, no, an ABC, a scale question, right? Like, so we had further refined criteria. But as we went broader and said, all of these messages across all these different types of features that are used for different types of things, we want it to fit this thing. What we found was it was not effective, right? It just isn't, the prompt engineering approach didn't work. We could not prompt our way to good enough accuracy. And so that's ultimately what led us down the RAG approach. And so again, it was more like we believe this will significantly improve, but we don't know. So we're going to test and start building. And as we started creating those embeddings, we started with a small subset and tested it. It was like, oh, this is significantly better. And then we expanded that across the different topical areas until we reached the really high level of accuracy. And so for us, it was maybe born more out of necessity than like, this is exactly how it will be. But it's been effective. So I'm excited to learn from my other panelists, because it sounds like they're doing some really interesting things as well here.
Awesome, thank you. And I love that, prototype and learn and iterate on things quickly. That's super core to the process. Rafa, I'll direct my next question to you. Huridocs clearly works with a lot of sensitive human rights data, and that seems like it has played a really critical role in how your organization has gone about model development and deployment choices. And you shared a little bit about your architecture and some of those decisions during your presentation. So thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind just kind of pinpointing a few of those decisions that were most driven by data privacy or other responsible AI concerns, and specifically, what are some of the trade-offs that you had to make as a result of those decisions? How did you decide?
Yeah, so actually this is at the core of what we do and what drives our decisions really most heavily, because as you mentioned, the data we hold is really, really sensitive, and it is not enough. Our platform allows you to have a fully private collection where it has nothing exposed to the World Wide Web, right? You need to log in. But even though we have that, having your data on servers that may be inspected or spied upon, right, which is a difficult conversation to have. drives many of our decisions. For example, we need to host our platforms in responsible servers that we know that they're respectful with the data, accountable for not sharing this with governments, with whomever wants to have access to this information. And this extends heavily to the machine learning part, which if you are using the big corporate APIs, you are sending data through the prompts, through the APIs. So we cannot have that unless the partner concretely says that data governance for me is okay, right? So we start at the most secure level, and our solution was actually to host the servers ourselves. So at the beginning, our machine learning lead actually had the server in his home, and it is a consumer grade machine with 2 GPUs, very hefty GPUs with 24 gigabytes, but they are consumer data that people use to game on, right? These are not the top of the line NVIDIA multi-$1,000 GPUs that you have on data centers. And this actually allows us to be completely isolated from anything outside, and the prompts go only inside. The models feed the data only to themselves. We are now looking into, as this becomes more trendy, some of the server providers are actually providing GPU VPIs that I put it on the presentation, sandbox, which means that you are not putting you are not sending data out to the big models. You are running the models into hardware that is controlled by you or your service provider, right? So it's a really complex thing, but it completely drives us. And that also means that we need to have smaller models, right? Because we cannot have 120 gigabytes of NVRAM. We have only the smaller grade machines, so we need to think of smaller models that do more specific work. So yeah, I don't know if this is too technical, but yeah, that's the idea. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Rafa. So, Alysia, you mentioned that it required a significant shift for you and the Materiom to adopt that mindset of rapid iteration, and perhaps as a result of being in the scientific field where gathering and learning from data takes often a bit more time than the technology field. And I know iterative development can sometimes be at odds with the expectations of stakeholders or funders who might be expecting you to kind of define and hit milestones well before you've even tested something. So how did your team go about building that muscle for iterative development? How has that served you? And how did you navigate some of those tensions between stakeholder expectations and the need to pivot and learn?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's certainly been really fundamental to our success over the last year and 2 years, really. But over the last year, we've really developed a very a new way of working that is very kind of like a very agile software company, by contrast to a more project-focused NGO. And that's been fundamental to both be synced up with the pace of change in the underlying technology that we're harnessing. So certainly with the pace of LLM development and just general AI across different like machine learning techniques, and like the pace of innovation in the space is so rapid that it's been crucial to not only get the cycle of learning really, really fast, where we're able to iteratively test our models and our new features at like on a kind of weekly, bi-weekly basis. But we're also able to anticipate new trends that are coming out and then trial the utility of them with our users before they're actually integrated into our product, if that makes sense. So it's really important to be doing these kind of, we do a lot of mock-ups, we do a lot of user testing of like, if we invest in this space, how much benefit would it provide, et cetera. So that's a kind of anticipatory aspect of it, in addition to the actual cycle of software and model development and user testing. it has been really transformative for the team. I would say that it has enabled so much more learning on, in terms of just not only the interdisciplinary nature of what we're working with, so we're able to integrate insights from the field much faster, but obviously learning as the technology continues to develop. And it's also like pattern recognition learning, if that makes sense. So like as you kind of flex this muscle, you're more likely to be able to make sense of the trends afoot and more comfortable with what they mean for your particular product direction. I would say there are tensions when it comes to some of the larger bets that are more differentiators in the field. So for instance, on the data generation side, there are much bigger partnerships and much kind of, you really kind of have to make a strategic bet that's, kind of getting a sense of the trends towards improvement in the kind of frontier AI models, and where there are clear things that are not going to be overtaken by the pace of technology, right? And when they match up with a clear USP and a clear need from users, that is a very good strategic focus to place longer term bets on, if that makes sense. But that's a very tricky strategic matrix to be understanding, is like, because you don't want to pour all your small team's resources into something that the underlying technology is just going to solve in like a month's time or 2 months' time or 6 months' time, because that's just a kind of silly strategic thing to do. But yet it's really hard to figure that out as you're going fast. So that kind of like more strategic decision making really requires sitting and pattern recognizing, and then actually having the courage to kind of place longer term bets in areas that you think are really differentiators in your field, and where the kind of underlying technology is really not going to cross those bridges that the user really needs to see. And in our case, like, it's just really clear that, natural materials just need a lot more time and data generation. So that's a kind of intervention point that's been clear to us for a while. Yeah, so those are some thoughts in that area. It's certainly been transformative for the team, and I would say like what first felt like an overcorrection actually feels like the right pace of change now. And I think we're constantly revisiting our engine, so to speak, and how fast we can ship products and how fast we can get user feedback, and what that means for the pace of development in our space. So yeah, super critical.
Thank you. And yeah, definitely a big challenge to try to forecast where the technologies are going and what's going to be solved already for you, and what to invest your team's time in. I'm going to do one last question, and in the meantime, I'll invite folks from the audience, if anyone has questions, to post them in the chat. And maybe this last question, for anyone who's interested in chiming in, we'll make it a little bit of a rapid fire round, because I know we are getting close to the end of our time. But something that often underlies AI solution development but gets a little less of the limelight is data and AI governance practices that teams put in place to enable the ongoing success of solutions. So things like defining roles, processes, and tools for accountability and oversight. Maybe if each of you could share a governance practice that you found really critical for your organization, and how that might have evolved from when you first started to now.
Yeah, I can very quickly and say that for us, I talked a little bit about governance already, but the idea is that at this point, we signal everything that has been AI generated as AI generated, right? That for us gives us a lot of leeway into saying you are reading something that was not generated by a human, treat it like that, because we are very aware of this unpredictability, the level of failures that you have, the bias that we haven't talked a lot about, but there is a clear bias in pre-trained models, right, that we need to fight, and there's huge conversations everywhere about how to deal with this bias. So yeah, for us, this is one big part of data governance on top of all the security that I've already discussed.
I'll jump in. A couple of things. So, um, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we work in the healthcare space, and that alone puts a lot of expectation into data governance, auditability, things like that. And so, fortunately, we already kind of have a lot of that in place due to like just the nature of our product space. So I'll add something that's not related specifically to what we built, but more in how we operate, and that is like creating creating policies and procedures and guidelines for our team about over the use of AI in their own workflow and processes. I think that's like maybe a under recognized thing is like you have to create the right processes and guidance for your team to create safety in how all of the work that's undergirding what gets built actually takes place, because there's one end of the spectrum which is where you avoid it altogether, which obviously like that would not be a good approach, but the other end of the spectrum is the wild west, and you don't know where your data is going and how it's being used, and you don't have good proper controls. And so for us, a lot of that was just creating that clarity, giving guidance, creating processes around both policies of like what is allowed, what's not allowed, specific example sort of things, and then creating guidelines of when it doesn't fit this, here's how to approach it. Here's the process where you have to submit the use case, and we review it with our compliance team and say yes or no, and yes in this circumstance, right? Like those are all things in terms of how we think about creating an environment where people are encouraged to leverage AI in their processes, but also doing so in a safe way.
Yeah, I'll pick up on a couple of those themes. First of all, we're really in the midst of developing our kind of data governance strategy, and we see this as a real cross-cutting need among many other companies that are kind of our peers in the tech nonprofit space. So, for instance, we're leaning on partners such as Fast Forward and others to kind of help navigate how to develop these kind of policies that have a lot of commonality, even amongst very different use cases. So I think there's a real space here for collaboration, which I'm really excited about, and the kind of learning resources that the McGovern Foundation puts together is I think the right space for this kind of conversation to be had in, because there's so much to learn from each other, and I certainly want to signal that we are on that learning journey. The kind of ingredients that are interesting in our case is that we have very different types of data that go under this bigger bracket. We work with the open access scientific literature. As an NGO, we're really interested in the kind of closed access scientific literature that you can use some types of data from and not others. There's also the your own data that can be generated that we're working on, and then also user data, right? Those that are like that are more commercially minded versus those in the scientific world, and we straddle those two user groups. Those that are kind of developing real commercial companies, and their IP is like 100% watertight and needs to remain so. And then the scientific community who actually has an interest in kind of having shared data pools, so to speak. So that landscape is really fascinating and complex, and how AI stitches into all of that is really interesting, and we're definitely working to ensure that we have the right data governance for those types of data. I will also touch on the data governance or the data policy side of things within our company. I think this is a really interesting point, as Jeremy mentioned, to create good processes. And one of the things that has been so unexpected and interesting to deal with in a small team that's very interdisciplinary is a lot of these AI tools are really allowing people to do and produce things that are traditionally in someone else's camp, right? And that creates both, it's an amazing opportunity. So basically we can all get kind of in each other's code base. And it's not all code. It's also like in producing mock-ups and developing strategy documents and doing market sizing. And like all of this is like very tricky to navigate, because it really needs experts that have the context to really understand the way in which to contextualize this information, even when produced, and really be able to situate it and understand, okay, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, and what are the assumptions baked in, and what was the prompt, and all of that kind of thing. So it's very complex. It's an opportunity, because obviously, like as a more strategy person, for the first time, I can easily get people to visualize how I'm visualizing a kind of product trajectory. But one of the conversations we've had recently is ensuring that context remains the kind of main communicated thing. So just putting a visual there and not saying, actually, what I'm trying to communicate here is a general product direction, not where that button is, even though it seems like a fully fledged product visual, right? And for the doers on the team, for those that are actually making things, it's very confusing often to know what is the main thing being communicated, where before it was kind of more clear in terms of process, and the tools were kind of in their own camp, if you see what I mean. So this is a bit of Wild West for sure. And as a company, we're working really hard to kind of ensure that everyone kind of comes together and renews our sense of practice around this, both from the perspective of what tools to use, from what perspective, and kind of being clear about the assumptions baked in, but also about like understanding the context and communicating things in a way that is like appropriately received in the different ways that we all stitch in and create kind of a product together. So that's been really interesting. And I think that kind of messiness is really is both an opportunity, but also like a main challenge in the time ahead.
Totally. Thank you. Well, we are at time here, and I know it doesn't look like we have any audience questions. I'm going to close us out. I think we had a really robust discussion, so thank you, everybody, for joining, and a huge thank you to our three guest speakers. Alysia, Rafa, and Jeremy, thank you so much for sharing your experiences on the adoption phase with us today. So many important takeaways around user research and user experience challenges, model development challenges, AI governance, and so much more. As previously mentioned, we will be uploading this recording to the adoption phase page on the Learning Hub in the days to come. And we hope to see everybody again soon for the last installment of our series, which will focus on the impact phase of the AI journey. So stay tuned for that session coming up in the new year. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.